but at some point of time it has been. The French immigration during the Second World War, they were assembling and preparing plans as for the liberation of France. Now these people, they keep contacts, they're spread all over London. And I think Ukraine could be naturally the second London for Russian citizens. This problem is not being solved neither at the state level, and the only people who are raising the subjects are the journalists. One fact is that immigration from Russia exceeded all the previous periods over 15 years of Vladimir Putin's reigning. About 210,000 of Russian citizens have exited Russians. So we see that the inflow has increased 2 times. It's clear that some part of these people are the ones looking for the job immigration. They are not ideological, but take into account the surge of those leaving the country. I think around 1/2 of the people, if not more, are the people who immigrate, first of all, due to political reasons. Today we'll try to find out what kind of acknowledgement is there in Ukraine for the fact, which are the thoughts around it, and at least is there a possibility through legislation or in other manner to organize, to involve Russian intellectuals here, and with these people Ukraine could really open its brotherly embraces. We'll see first the video, then we'll come to the discussion. From Russia to Kiev, it's not a joke. More and more Russians are trying to change their residence. Everybody has their own motives, everybody has their own situation. But at least one reasoning is similar. People do not want to live behind the Iron Curtain, which they say becoming stronger and stronger and more inevitable day to day. Journalist Irina even repainted her fingernails into Ukrainian flag colors. She said she found no fascists here and she was not shot because of the Russian language. For her, Ukraine is something related to the freedom. I'm afraid of the Iron Curtain. I'm afraid it will fall down, and maximum where I will have my vacations is Crimea. With all the respect to the territory which is annexed, I don't want to have my vacations there. I want to freely move around the countries. Russian nationalist Dyomushkin is almost the only resistant to the Russian policy and the war. He don't want to leave the Russia, but his supporters are already in Kiev. All the leaders of nationalists are in Kiev. They're in Russia. They're either in the jail or they are at large in Russia, including Ukraine, while they are attempting to leave the escape the prosecution, or they're waiting how it will end, same as myself. How many of these immigrants are here? The count is not being done, but there are more and more. And former FSB employee who is now fighting for Ukraine at Ukraine's side, and Ilya Martyanov, the student who tried to organize a march for fertilization of Kuban. Indeed, for Ukraine, this is a new format of existence, new opportunities. This is what is called the soft power, meaning the situation when Ukraine is becoming a bigger motherland, not only for Ukrainians, but for the whole Slavic world. The forced Russian immigrants, the point of getting the Ukrainian passport, cannot get the fast resolution of this. Double citizenship is forbidden, and people are reluctant to leave their Russian citizenship. Almost a single citizen of that is this Kiev train terminal. Now Russians are starting to enter it to have the feeling of freedom. Thank you for this report. Now I would like to come to the discussion. Before we'll come to this, I would like to briefly announce the agenda in terms of moderation. We have 1 hour left to discuss all the points, taking into account the number of speakers. Please restrain to 5 minutes per person, so we would have the time for the question and answers. If you will be above this limit, I will be warning you beforehand. Now, with great pleasure, I'm giving the floor to Yevgeniy Kyselyov, a well-known Russian journalist whose reports have brought up several generations of journalists, Ukrainians as well. I remember when different NTV channel was there. I remember I started my day with this, and the phrase, "Let's see the bottom line." It meant for me that we'll hear not only the Russian events, but also the Ukrainian. Back then, interviews with Yulia Tymoshenko were freely to be issued at Russian channels. There was material from Yevgeniy Kyselyov where he was speaking of his quite biased attitude towards the Russian immigrants. Those were, if not the Russian agents, like Putin agents, they were insincere, at least to Ukraine. So the floor is yours. Thank you. Frankly speaking, it's a bit awkward for me to be the first person speaking in this panel. Indeed, in terms of the topic discussed, I expressed some of my thoughts in the column released in the Новое Время, Kyiv journal, a really good journal, the way I see it, the magazine, which I cooperate with. The way I see it, it sets quite a high intellectual bar in the discourse of the future of Ukraine. As for the subject being discussed, let me give you a few thoughts of mine. First of all, I will not quote. People who are able to log into Facebook, they can see the post of our respected moderator, Berezovets, where he announces our today's discussion. Then you can see the comments, and basically you will see that the entire range of opinions is represented here, including myself, who is mentioned here, in a concept far from being favorable. And basically, what should we discuss further if the attitude of these commenters, let me see which is the brightest here, like to bring more and more Putin supporters here. Do you want this? Actually, I would tell this. No matter which figures would be published here, including the official ones, the way I understand, the discussion will be of the people. People who are forcibly discussing basically the political or ideological immigration from Russia due to the events happening there. And due to the political regime getting stricter and stricter there. It has been 7 years, it will be 7 years soon since I came into Ukraine. And as Taras was remembering my working at NTV, paradoxical how it may seem, this job was not continuing for 8 years even. This is what I'm mentioning in my column. Whoever wishes, they can read it out. But the paradox was that the work which brought me the most popularity among the community It lasted not more than 8 years. And my work in Ukraine lasted some comparable time. So I have to mention that this period of life for me is nonetheless important than the period of working in Russian media. To some extent, I am an exception because I am not a political immigrant here. I would say there has been no possibility for me, at least when the times were more or less vegetarian, to work in Russia and media, as I've been one of the first ones to come into the most severe blacklists, and the restriction, unpublished restriction for me to work as a journalist was announced as the highest ban. I think it was Putin himself to put me on the list. But here, the interesting job appeared, which I immersed totally, and on the contrary to my colleagues from Ukraine, I'm constantly in Kiev. In any other countries, wherever I am, when they are asking where I'm from, I'm saying I'm from Ukraine, from Kiev. But of course, I'm a holder of the Russian passport. But comparing the situation to the 7 years ago conditions, when I was relocating, as I'm joking, as a labor migrant, the situation has drastically changed. Because now, it's not only the people are having the possibility to work as a certain trades, first of all, as a journalist. First of all, we are speaking of the political researcher, social researcher, sociologist. It's really difficult for education representatives to work in many higher educations. A bright example, sorry for the tautology, is Andriy Zubov, who worked in MGIMO, in Moscow State University of International Relations, who published several bright pro-Ukrainian articles, and he made several bright speeches to support the Maidan and condemning the actions of Russian powers. The way, out of what I know, he is quite often speaking in Kyiv-Mogilyanska Academy. The other part of those is the politicians who are really marginalized, and the way I see, they do not have realistic influence on political events in Russia, but they are more and more apprehending of their fate and even the political, even personal security. With all this said, I cannot say that there is a line of these people who would like to leave for Ukraine or any other country, because the decision on immigration is quite a difficult one. Everybody has families and children, and quite a majority of people, even those who are asking me quite often. Previously I was asking, what's the life for you in Ukraine? Now they're asking me more in terms of how should they come to Ukraine, what is needed, what are the costs of living here, like more of a household issues, how to get a job, how to get employment permit, temporary residence permit, etc., etc. Questions like this are being asked, but this is far from meaning that people are ready for it already. In any case, I'm stressing that quite a lot here depends on the position of Ukrainian authorities. Ukrainian legislation, yes, I'm about to finish my speech. And I think the most is the position of Ukrainian society, at least its thinking, the advanced layer of it. It can have different approaches depending on which state, which society will be brought up here in Ukraine. But a really simple example that Taras spoke of, the French people who relocated to London, where they had the center of the Free France, headed by de Gaulle. I can give another example. The US, during the World War II, they have involved them in the Manhattan Project, the project to create an atomic weaponry. They involved Italian, Austrian, Hungarian, Italian physicists who had the citizenship of the countries America was waging war against, but nevertheless they were working for America. They were working for the idea of winning and overcoming the Hitler regime, and they have contributed a lot to this. It's clear that they moved Germany even before the war broke out. Most of them were simply escaping the Hitler regime, but nevertheless, in America, they have done quite a lot for their new motherland. Yes, it is truth. America is land of immigrants. We should not forget about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to Hennadiy Druzenko, the Government Commissioner for Ethnonational Policy. Thank you, Taras, but I believe that it will be fair enough because I've been working a lot with Mr. Tarasiuk, who's quite a famous politician. And do I have the right to delegate or to transfer the word to another person? Okay, thank you, Gennadiy. Thank you for that. The need to establish simplified procedure for acquiring citizenship of Ukraine has been in existence for a long time. I personally joined the authors of draft law presented to it. I'm not the author, I just joined the authors, and the authors are Oleksandr and Andriy Teslenko, because I'm deeply convinced that Ukrainian state has the duty, and that is the duty especially to the citizens of other countries of Russia, those who disagree with the policy of Russian leadership, who suffer from the pressure of the authorities because of their position in relation to Ukraine. They will be given the opportunity to get Ukrainian citizenship according to simplified procedure. That's my general position. Talking about the legal part of that and about the draft law, it does have some drawbacks, some technical and legal drawbacks, but I will talk not about these issues, but about the issues which are humanitarian and political. Taras has already mentioned how many Russians left Russia during these 11 months. That means that there is a trend that the flow of political immigrants from Russia will be growing. And I got some letters from the citizens of Russia. People addressed me as the MP, and people expressed the desire, well, they requested me to help them get citizenship of Ukraine because they disagree with the Russian politics. And I had no doubts. I believe this should be done from the political and humanitarian point of views. Russia makes a big PR for itself out of each of such case. For us, for Ukrainians, it's not a PR, it's a support. After the victory of the Orange Revolution, many Russian politicians were requesting new Ukrainian authorities, and they were talking about necessity to create conditions to get refuge, to get the opportunity to live in Ukraine, because they believe that Ukraine has become comfortable democratic country where citizens of Russia who disagree with the policy of Russian leadership can stay. And this issue for me is quite clear from political point of view. I had discussions with some of our colleagues in the parliament who will not be MPs in the next Verkhovna Rada, but they were accusing me basically that I'm trying to increase the fifth column of Russian in Ukraine, which is absurd, which has always been absurd. Those who wanted to get to our country with some purpose, with some objectives which are the objectives of the enemy, they are here. Those who are in Crimea, in Donbass, on the occupied territories, those who are conducting subversive activities, they have been doing it after the Orange Revolution, after the Revolution of Dignity in Ukraine, in the center of Kiev, they are doing it. But the question is why the Ukrainian law enforcement body is not acting. It's not about that category of Russian citizens. It's about Russian citizens who are looking for refuge abroad, including in Ukraine, those who disagree with their regime. And that's why I joined the authors of this draft law. But I believe that we shouldn't be addressing that issue just legislatively. The president, the head of the state, can provide such simplified procedure for those who want to become citizens of Ukraine. And I requested the acting head of the state so that he, based on his powers, provides such right of gaining citizenship of Ukraine to the citizens of Russia. Unfortunately, I didn't get any feedback on that. But what is important is that Ukraine has to help Russian citizens who disagree with the policy of Russian leadership and those who are under pressure there, they should have such right. Thank you. Borys Ivanovich now, and we will ask Hennadiy Druzenko, Government Commissioner for Ethnonational Policy. Please answer the following question. Are you registering the number of requests from Russian citizens? That's probably not under your mandate, but that's maybe under the border service. How many citizens requested about that, Russian citizens, after the annexation of Crimea? And what do you think? How much can that flow increase? Is it from certain Russian regions? Is that just those citizens who are of Russian ethnical background, or maybe people who are not Orthodox Christians, but members of other religious communities? Because Ukraine lost part of its Muslim community. About 300,000 people are in Crimea, and we have a certain disbalance of religious structure in Ukraine. I will try to answer this question in the second part of my statement, but I will start from more general things, from a famous quote, "I have a dream." After Maidan that we had this winter, after what we have in the east of Ukraine, Ukraine has become not just unlike Russia, it has become different from even classical Europe. My dream is Ukraine should become European America. There's a certain community of people who value freedom more than any cultural or language identification, where the separation line is not according to language, cultural, religious tradition, but based on the loyalty to such values as freedom, dignity, human rights. Basically, there was such a period of time in our history, the period of Cossacks. We can compare that with the period of American colonization. The people who were oppressed in this territory and in other European territories were going to Zaporizhia Sich and were creating their own republic. The citizens of Russian Federation, they are the first potential donor of this new Ukrainian political nation, talking about the numbers, about closeness, about the lack of language problems, and because of the closeness in mentality. The Russians have always been saying that they feel very comfortable in Kiev especially, but it's not just about Russia. It's about post-Russian space, which feels comfortable in Ukraine because of Russian language, but also we have quite an interesting cases when people from Europe move to Ukraine. They do not fall under they do not fit into this very correct European life. In the east of Ukraine, we have the citizens of European Union fighting legally or illegally, but Ukraine has become the center which attracts people who are more passionate, more loyal to freedom, and who are ready to create their own future. And I can see that legislative process, certain legislative drafting does not catch up with the reality. Very often the reality is in the conflict with what we have inherited during these 23 years of development of Ukraine, when a year ago no one could imagine that in a year we'll be talking about hybrid war, we'll be hiding our friends, and we'll be listening to the information from the General Staff of NATO that Russian heavy weaponry is crossing the border, which is not unfortunately controlled by Ukrainian bodyguards. So we have the trend, and myself as an activist, as a person who's been published, I do everything for Ukraine to follow that way and to become special, not just for post-Soviet space. Different means strange. A lion, that's the formula of Russian world. Ukrainian identity becomes exclusive things. You can be ethnic Jew, speak Russian, feel yourself Kievite, European, and feel yourself Ukrainian. So that trend in the new Verkhovna Rada should find its support. It's not just about simplified procedure for gaining citizenship. We have Andriy Teslenko, who had to run away from Putin regime because he was sharing some information about Maidan and was supporting Maidan. The question is, that's actually our only chance to become the center for everything which is creative and passionate, because otherwise we will not catch up with these other civilizations.
The figures are more available with the migration service, but at least my mandate is not expanding towards the citizenship, but wherever I'm having the interview or in any other ways indirectly, I can support it. And using this opportunity, I'm appreciating my colleagues at Border Service and Migration Service of Ukraine. On one hand, we have to keep on pressing the political forces that we would develop in this direction, because Ukraine, for Ukrainian ethnicity, and after what we had in Maidan and in the East, this is definitely a way to nowhere. Thank you. Thank you, Hennadiy. You've mentioned some real stories of Russians in your speech. The Russians who moved to the territory of Ukraine at the wave of Euromaidan events, and same with the war that is now in the east of Ukraine. Mr. Alexander, are you a Russian citizen? I am obtaining the residence permit in Ukraine, but I have the citizenship of Russia. So I will give the floor to Mr. Schetinin, Oleksandr Schetinin, Editor-in-Chief, New Region, who have publicly refuted Russian citizenship, and just recently he made a marvelous trip to Ekaterinburg, so he'll be speaking of the same. It's a lot easier for me because almost permanently I'm working and living in Kiev since 2004. Back then it was not a political choice. I just fell in love with the country and the capital of it. Accordingly, I have a certain experience and I have sufficient basis to have the citizenship status. I am married to a citizen of Ukraine, and I have certain other basis. I am employed, but many other people do not have any basis for this. We're not speaking of some people who are coming here, making some statements in the airport, requesting to provide a shelter. They're coming every day. Two people I'm familiar with from Yekaterinburg, they have no basis to have the status, not even the political shelter, because one of them is a doctor as per education and as per his trade, but he's saying my whole political activity was participation in the political rallies. Really, I was not prosecuted and chased. There are no real basis, no real grounds. He has no close relatives here in Ukraine. He has no basis. But he came here, he made no statements, and he's not going to move back. So he was the person who was desocialized there with such a humanitarian profession. There are no clear numbers. Taras spoke of the number of people who left Russia. It's not quite clear, as we're speaking simply of leaving. I mean, departure. It doesn't mean that they have entered Ukraine. And there is a number of unaccounted people, and they can be here. They can be here permanently and can experience some problems during border crossing. Of course, some first time I was happy about not being obliged to carry a passport here, but they have really no grounds to obtain such status. The second problem, I would not be speaking of the opponents to Putin's regime, but of the proponents of Ukraine, the supporters of Ukraine. These are exactly the people Ukraine needs. Among the proponents of Putin, even the Girkin we can mention, because he demands some stricter measures from him. And even among the nationalists, there is a division and split. Part of the people, they answer whose Crimea is, they are saying it is Ukrainian. But some liberals, they are making public statements. They are saying it's better not to touch this point. Somebody are saying directly that all in all, Crimea is Russian. So there are people who are opponents to Putin, but they are not supporters of Ukraine. Do we need them here? Again, the next point, as per my personal experience, as I was the one to make the statement in December that I think I am politically Ukrainian, In spring, I claimed that I refute the Russian citizenship as a protest to the war. The position of Russian citizens who supported the war, they were not only against as I said, there are people who support the war, but they are opposing also the policy of Kremlin. So as I've been here for 6 months and more, people are calling me and asking, how can I move to Ukraine? What can I answer? This point is not prescribed somewhere. I don't think there is some status like political refugee. People are coming same as refugees from Iraq, from Somalia. So the political reasons are being viewed and considered, but as far as I understand, legislatively, it's not being put. Why are we speaking only of the Russian citizens? Here is a journalist of my media, Vadim. He's from Belarus. He was supporting Maidan. He has been at Maidan events. Why is he out of this list? Again, when I was making this statement that I'm political Ukrainian, being Russian as per nationality, the same statements were made by my Kazakh friends. They are also sharing all the values of Ukraine. They want to move, but we are speaking not of them, but only of the citizens of Russia. And among the people who are coming, quite a lot of people who are strange, pretty strange. Because again, I am having mails like, we need to meet, all details during personal meeting. I met people a couple of times, but then I started refusing it. The first person came with no legend at all. I am from Canada, I am Russian, I am supporting Ukraine. His bag was on the table, and he said probably they're starting some filming of the anatomy of the protest, because we met in the cafe and we're saying that the meetings of the edition, and he said loudly, so probably an armed coup is what you're preparing. So I understood what this discussion is all about. They are sending in some people who are unprepared at all. I will speak to my relatives in Kiev of the threats from your side. But there are people who are more experienced, and sometimes the situations are really directed to certain points. And it's not only the point of helping those who really need the help, and to those who really want to be useful to Ukraine and can be useful to Ukraine, but it's also a matter of creating sort of sieve, a filter, to take out people like that. And we have an idea with our cooperations to create such a structure, because we know more of the people who are coming, and we know of the possible reasons. So I think we are able to determine which are the motives of these people to come. So actually, Ukraine has become unready. In 2004, when I made my choice, I said to my colleague journalists that quite a lot of people from Russia will go here. And now, as our journalists, my colleagues, and a lot of other people are facing this problem, I think there are even the numbers missing, the statistics is missing. When I've been to Vilnius in spring, I met the ambassador of Ukraine, people who are dealing with immigration and providing the citizenship. I asked him, it was even in spring, the war was at its early stage. The Russia was strict, but not as strict as now. Has the number increased of the people who are asking for the Ukrainian citizenship? If we had none last year, so May this year, we already have 10 people. So we can say there's a 10 times increase. But as you understand, Lithuania is not the place to request Ukrainian citizenship. Is it easier to receive it here or in Ukraine, I asked. I said, of course, it's more difficult because all the documents should be sent by diplomatic mail to Kiev, etc. So Wherever Ukrainian representative offices are there, I think these are the places to contact. That is why I think it should be resolved at the legislation level to simplify the procedure. But as I said, for somebody, it should get more complicated to come here. And at the level of some social initiatives for the citizens of Russian, because they know better the people who are coming here and who are providing help. So we have to make some conclusions on specific personalia. That would be it, I think.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for such an emotional statement. We understand that those problems you are facing, your countrymen are facing, they are very often stated to be your own problems. But is it true or not? I'll hear about that from Andriy Teslenko. Let me make a comment, one small comment. The procedure is complicated. I received the permission to live here and to be a citizen of Ukraine, but the procedure to get a citizenship, if there are such basis for that, it includes such a procedure as to receive a document that on non-consideration, or that there is no criminal record. I understand that this is wrong, because we sent you to Russia to get a document that you don't have a criminal record, but you can be incriminated there. It may happen that you will not be able to leave. That's a paradox. Thank you very much. Andriy Teslenko, please, let's listen to you. Good afternoon. I will tell you about myself. On the 20th of April, I arrived to Ukraine. The reason was because there was a search in my apartment and related to a criminal case. They initiated for reposting of one mail in my contact on my page, and because of that text, there was they could use 2 articles against me, causing national. Both articles about 5 years of prison. I will tell you a little about problems of refugees. Everything started from Boryspil airport. When we spoke to border Ukrainian border guards, and we told them that we are going to ask for a political shelter, political asylum. They were very nice to us, and they gave us a document with an address where we could see the migration service. We arrived to that office, but that was a wrong department. They sent us to somewhere else. As a result, we had to go to somewhere else. So this is just about not about bureaucracy, but how different agencies cooperate between themselves. Later on, we moved to Uzhhorod. We were lucky that, to some extent, that Russia occupied Crimea, because right after that, there was a movement of volunteers that who provided housing for refugees from Crimea, and for us, they found us a place to live in Uzhhorod. We spoke to a local migration service there, and I have to praise them, because there were very nice people in Uzhhorod. They treated us very warmly, and they tried to help. We lived there for 3 months, and we were interviewed. We filled out different documents, but there was a dilemma of 1 month and a half, because a local professional, he could not get necessary questionnaire for us, because a professional in Kiev was on vacations all the time. So that's why for a month and a half we were just doing nothing there. Then in July we finished with migration service, or local migration service, and they sent our case, our file to Kiev. Then it was in Kiev for 3 months. I don't know what they were doing to it. What in general you can do for such a long time, because Nobody contacted us. It's a very interesting system when a decision about whether to give an asylum or not is taken by a person who had never seen us before. And I believe that we are lucky because, first of all, we are Russian-speaking people. At least we can communicate with volunteers who the only ones that to provide assistance to us because there was no assistance from Ukrainian state. But refugees from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Africa, I don't know how they survive because it's an absolutely wrong, strange country or culture for them, without a roof, without a place to live, without means for existence, and nobody would work to integrate them to Ukrainian society. Nobody could explain them local laws. That's the life. I received finally a document of a credential of a refugee, thanks to Hennadiy. If he didn't know about me, I don't know what he did. I received a document, but it's expired because according to the law requires half a year. But the half a year was on the 28th of October. So, but I tell you that we are lucky because we spoke to volunteers and to professionals on Ukrainian legislation. They told to get a status of a refugee during 1 year and a half. That's quite normal if they issue that document to you. 5 or 7% received such a document. They received a status of a refugee. So I don't know. Somehow this should be changed. We are not just. We are just people. We are not just numbers in statistical documents. Thank you very much, Andriy. It's great that everything is fine for you, though with some delayment, but you received that document, refugee document. And there were a lot of just criticism to State Migration Service. It will be correct if the representatives like Natalia Naumenko, if she will try to answer to us how that criticism, how true it is. Is there a chance? And also we have Mr. Tarasiuk here, who can solve these issues on the level of the legislation. So if you blame legislators, deputies, that here they are. But if it's your fault, let's deal with that. Thank you. Yes, State Migration Service can accept some criticism, but we can respond to some of the questions. And we believe that then they are not objective. Comments, I mean. But we spoke about statistics that the Migration Service has the data that reflects the real picture of migration in Ukraine, to Ukraine. And we have about 230,000 people who live here, 154,000, and they are citizens of Russian Federation. If we speak about temporal living in Ukraine, that's more than 70,000 people, and 7.4 thousand, and they are citizens of Russian Federation. Here you spoke about, you mentioned that migration from Russia became more active this year. I disagree with that. Maybe I don't have all the numbers from the State Borys service on that issue, but we can tell you about the number of people who ask us to get a permission for migration. Last year and this year, it's about 10.5 thousand people. So these are people who wanted to get the right for migration, but the number of people who would like to get asylum in Ukraine, that number went up last year. Here we had 31% from Russian Federation. This year it's more than 100. Now, the topic of my presentation was about the issue of migration legislation. I can mention one point. We can argue forever whether we should change it or not. Everybody will have has his own opinion. But starting in 2011, such amendments like we have in migration legislation on migration, we had never had such changes. It's about citizenship of Ukraine. It's about migration of from abroad. All these novelties in our legislation meet completely European legislation and adapted to that. We speak about grounds to get us permission for migration or could get a document for temporary living. The same grounds like in European legislation, not more nor less. So experts made conclusions. If we speak about asylum and migration, the same grounds like in Europe. We received in September there was a committee from EU and there was no comment, no criticism. We have a chance to give permission for migration according to quotas and outside of quotas. And in addition to quotas, the Cabinet of Ministers cancelled quoting permissions for migration for investors. We can give us, if there is nobody which can limit migration service, and if procedures will begin. If we speak about the situation in how to get a political asylum, about getting a political asylum or citizenship of Ukraine, because a citizen of Russia or Belarus, they disagree with the political regime of that country. Our legislation is completely adapted, is in harmony with European. We joined the Convention of 1951 on the status of refugees and their criteria, like how to get a status of a refugee politically. We start to implement an additional protection directives of EU, and Ukraine is using that protection as to countries where there are international conflicts, like citizens of Russia, of Syria and Iraq and other countries. That's why I cannot say that a person who disagrees with the regime cannot get a legal status in Ukraine. There are tools for that. Maybe we should improve just those procedures for people to have more, to have free access to these procedures, or more education on procedures in the language they speak, because yes, there is a problem with interpreters. But all these procedures exist, and they are not worse than European, and sometimes they are better, because we take into consideration experience of not only in Europe, but we make one step ahead. If we speak about, you have just 1 minute left. Political asylum, the Constitution guarantees that political asylum is provided by the President, is granted by the President. And there is no tools, but there is an alternative, status of a refugee. We speak about the procedure of getting a status of a refugee. I disagree that it's not efficient. It's an efficient two levels system. It allows to reduce some corruption components, because we don't work directly with people, and we consider only materials we receive, and that is absolutely correct, and that is efficient. I agree with one thing. Until now, we don't have an efficient procedure of integration of people, but it's not our fault. We did everything possible for that tool for that instrument to exist, and there is. But we don't have, there is a program, the 2020, but we don't have money for that. The legislation can be beautiful and correct, but we have a problem with providing housing for people who receive that protection. We have a problem with integration, because everything done for integration, that is done with the support of regional offices of VKB or volunteers organizations. We received nothing from the state budget for that. This is what I wanted to tell you briefly about.
Thank you. As I understand, there is your colleague here, Sergiy Hunko, who is the head of the border service. I could continue. Okay, then if you agree, yes, I have something to say. The discussion was that Mr. Teslenko, he was provided by the residents, by the volunteers. Yes, we had only 2 temporary refugees in Odessa and in Zakarpattia, but they have limited possibilities to accommodate these people, around 330 places for them. We are trying to organize an additional point next to Kiev, but unfortunately there are no funds for that. There is no funds allocated for people, children with no supervision. But sorry, we are only increasing the number of the children coming from other countries having no place to live. We were planning to open such a point in exactly Kiev Oblast. There is no possibility to provide them for the training for Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian language. This is all being funded through volunteers, but it is all in the planning. There are no funds for it so far. So far it's volunteered only. The legislative basis have been made and accepted, but to make it to come into life, this is a different point. As for the other countries, immigrants from other countries, because Mr. Teslenko said that, I cannot agree here, because quite fast these people are adapting. Those countries who want to adapt, Afghanistan, Syria, they are learning the language quite fast, and all these points have been regulated. People are coming to school. In 1 month or 2, they are speaking Ukrainian not worse than Ukrainians, or even better, because they have the desire to improve in that. Indeed, there are maybe some people who do not want to integrate, and no matter which conditions would be created for these people, they will not integrate. We're speaking of Somali, people who strive to cross the border, and they want to get into the diaspora to get integrated faster. Immigration Service is working with the Employment Center, Social Policy Center, and Education Center. So far, it is working in a kind of a manual mode based on the personal ties and phone contacts, but it is being resolved. The children are entering schools, and even the higher education is available. We are supporting them, but of course, a couple of these issues, they remain. If we would speak or not speak of having the double citizenship in Ukraine, to have the simplified procedure for obtaining the citizenship by certain categories, this is of course a matter of discussion, and this would be a legislative initiative for our government officials. But I haven't seen any programs alike from the Ukrainian examples. There are analogies to say that people who are disagreeing with political regime of certain country to have simplified procedure of obtaining citizenship of other country. Frankly, I do not have examples of that. Thank you. Sorry if maybe it was too fast. I have to evidence to support my colleagues from DNS. My experience of cooperating with them was exceeding any expectations. Now we'll bring some conclusion because the next event is about to happen. We have only 2 people which I definitely want to hear. Just please be limited to 2-minute speech, and those of you who can supplement, you can do it offline. One of them has actually started doing it. It's Hennadiy Druzenko. Thank you. Actually, I think that as of now, the acute point is not to obtain the citizenship, but we have to speak freely and frankly of the double citizenship. Actually, it exists. We need to come to Zakarpattia and to see how Hungarians and Romanians are providing their citizenships. Of course, people were apprehending that they will give Russian passports and then Abkhazian scenario will start. As of now, we see that for Putin it's the yesterdays. Now he is protecting people not based on passport holding, but based on religion, language, etc. Ukraine was opposing for 20 years the double citizenship. Me as a legal person, we know numerous cases of that. But maybe the most advanced countries who would like to involve the people, as I was saying, the passionate, the artistic people, those who would be entrepreneurial for the new government, for the new Verkhovna Rada, this would be a matter of huge political discussions. Indeed, we have to seriously come back to the point, is it worth or not? At least I know two advanced countries, Switzerland and Australia, they're encouraging, not only allowing citizenship, double citizenship. And Borys Tarasiuk, the floor is yours now. Thank you. The thing I wanted to say I've spoken already, but having listened to the participants of this roundtable, I have a few comments to make. In particular, some of the words of Ms. Natalia. She said we're lacking funds. I think this is not the invention of Natalia. Every official would say that he lacks the funds to fulfill his duties. But I would like to remind that when Ukraine was resolving the point for the issue of simplifying the procedure to obtain the European citizenship, one of the conditions was signing the agreement of readmission. For that readmission agreement, European Union allocated some funds to create this kind of centers where the people would be located, people who were crossing the border in unlawful manner. I remember how many restrictions were there to master the funds, to spend them actually. This is the evidence of the awkwardness of Ukrainian bureaucrats and officials. The money is something you hardly deal without in any kind of case, but the matter is the attention of any official towards the person who got into the situation, same as the participant of our round table here. So why is that attention insufficient? If you remember, it's obvious that you were noting the difference of the attitude of Russians or Soviet salespeople and the salespeople from West. In Ukrainian restaurants, from where do we have this rudeness coming out? From where do you have this feeling of superficialness for the officials? I think this is the drawback of the whole Ukrainian society and Ukrainian officials in particular. There is not a lot to do in terms of legislation. You have to change the behavior of the society itself. And as for having no analogies to the great Ukrainian legislation, to this I would respond that the analogs exist and they are operational in the Western countries. Hundreds of thousands of Turks are working in Germany, in France. There are some problems of their own, but they do not say that there are no analogs to their situations. And all in all, an analog that was created by Vladimir Putin for Ukraine, there is hardly any analog in 21st century for this kind of rude aggression and the woe that he brought into our house. It's not only a problem of lack of funds, but we have to raise up the feeling of compassion among our officials. Yevgeniy Kyselyov. First of all, I would like to thank you for the possibility to participate in this discussion. Quite a lot of interesting points have been said. I would still be coming back to the subject that was voiced in some of the discussions that basically there are two different categories of Russian citizens. Not only the Russian citizens, actually, the citizens of the countries who are now in political union with the Putin Russia, with the Putin's regime, who would also like to find the political asylum. It's the only reason is that they are having hard to breathe in the neighboring Belarus, in the Kazakhstan, or anywhere else. But there are people for whom the political need, the political necessity to move, to live and to work in Ukraine can be confirmed in numerous ways by their public speeches, by their documented activity, God forbid some criminal cases opened against them because of their participation in demonstrations, in rallies, and some punishments from the Putin regime side for participating in this kind of protests and political actions. But there are some of the simple citizens for whom it is too difficult to live there. They don't like to live there. How to draw this line here in terms of legislation as well? I'm no specialist here. I can give no advices here. But as for some world experience, global experience, I would like to remind to everyone that in the migration legislation of many countries like US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, the so-called countries who are traditionally the immigrant proponent, there is a category, they are named differently, but for example, individual with exceptional ability. So relatively speaking, the person with exceptional abilities. I don't know whether this is provided for by the draft legislations, but basically it would give some lever that a person, say, who is not publicly known and who is, so speaking, documented political critic of Putin regime or such, but just a person would be able, in addition to his dislike of living and working in Russia now, who would be able to bring his knowledge, his trade, his opinions to good use to the Ukrainian society. And then it would be a technical issue in terms of how to establish certain criteria in this case. Thank you. And the last speaker would be, the last speaker in good meaning of this word will be Dmitry Hunko, and he will draw conclusions. I will hardly draw some conclusion, but with the situation with Andriy Teslenko, just a couple of words. Any situation can be turned into a negative experience. Out of what Andriy was speaking, let us take step by step. He arrived to Borispol. He was met by a border service official there. He's working with the foreigners every day. He's working with the Ukrainian citizens every day. It's hardly he's having every day the people who are applying for the refugee status. Actually, this would be more of an exception, not the rule. He didn't know the address of the migration service, but he knew the address of the Department of Militia. Of course, this is a drawback, but is there big drawback to speak of? I don't think so. Next thing, Andriy went to Zakarpattia. He said there are compassionate people who cooperated with him, and everything was fine. Nobody bullied him. And same as Natalia said, we have absolutely European legislation, European procedures prescribe that the first 3 months this case is considered at the location of the application with the participation of the person who is applying. Then 3 months later, it is considered in the state immigration service without involving the person. We are giving the materials, we are giving the requests and responses, and then this procedure is there. I would like to mention that this procedure lasts for more than 1 year in European countries. So I think this is normal, and migration service, its main task is to respect and to protect the interests of the Ukrainian society. I think this is a natural role. Then Mr. Andriy also applies Hennadiy, who is Ukrainian official, and everything is really good there as well. And today you have received this certificate of a refugee. What I would like to mention is that whole situation, except for that border official who didn't know the proper address in the very beginning, everything else is brought up in the negative light. But I would like to mention that refugee status is really serious status, and it was prescribed by UN Convention of 1951. Changing the legislation, changing the procedure according to some specific situation, I don't think this is the way for the Europe to come to Ukraine. Natalia asks for the floor. You have only 1 minute left. I will be really brief because we spoke of the funding, etc. I'd like to mention that we're closely cooperating with the European community, and they are ready to provide any kind of funds allocation for the efficient system of asylum, the sheltering. But as they're saying, it's really difficult for them. They don't want and they will not add 100% to zero that is available. For a few years, we were giving some calculations and estimates, but we received not a single penny for that. Now, I would like to say something to support Mr. Teslenko, that no matter which procedure is there, how good it is, and regardless of Mr. Tarasiuk's words, we need to educate the official. We need them to adapt to the legislation, but to prepare a specialist on migration issues, we need at least 3 years. I'm saying this as a person who deals with asylum issues and sheltering issues for 15 years. Also, over the last 10 years, I cannot remember this number of refugees to come. No, Mr. Schetinin, please. Just 30 seconds, maybe 1 minute. You see what the paradox is. The day before yesterday, I was flying from Moscow. I am both a journalist and I had the experience of communicating to such people. People are flying who are both in their discussions and as per their looks, they are almost the gunmen from the invaders' side, from the Donetsk. But they hold Ukrainian passports and they are crossing the borders painlessly. But all the rest, even myself, I'm flying constantly. I don't have my residence permit yet, but I'm speaking of living here for this many years. But recently they have started asking my marriage certificate, and I'm saying, here's the copy. They say, no, the copy won't do. You have to bring the original with you. And it's good that I find the solution. My wife doesn't give me the original, and then all the ladies are starting smiling. What kind of wife will give you the original marriage certificate? Then they say, okay, fine, you can pass. So this is not regulated. And my good acquaintance, Riek Shiro, who is a mathematical sciences lecturer, he had a clash to support a student, but his opponent was a member of Единая Россия party, so the person had to move to Ukraine. He was supporting the Maidan, and he explains himself that these are bureaucratic problems, nothing more, but 3 months and then extension, 3 months and then extension. It will be 1 year soon. If he will get a refusal, what will he do? Thank you, Alexander. Indeed, we have to finish. I would like to thank all the participants of today's discussion, to our organizers for the provided opportunity. Thank you.
Здесь, значит, он сначала был в городском, а потом его почему-то он